Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor the 41st President of the United States of America, George Herbert Walker Bush of Houston, Texas, who passed away on November 30th, 2018. President Bush was born on June 12, 1924 in Milton, Massachusetts, to Preston Sheldon Bush and Dorothy Walker Bush. He grew up in Greenwich, Connecticut, and attended Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts, where his illustrious career of leadership and public service began. On his 18th birthday, President Bush enlisted in the United States Navy and became a naval aviator. In the middle of World War II, he was commissioned as an ensign just before his 19th birthday, making him one of the youngest aviators in the Navy's history. Stationed in the Pacific Theater on the USS San Jacinto, he piloted a Grumman TBM Avenger. On September 2, 1944, while carrying out a mission against Japan, his plane was hit by enemy fire and was severely damaged. President Bush completed the mission and flew out over water where he was able to escape from the plane, where he was later rescued by the submarine USS Finback. After recovering from his injuries, he returned to flying as soon as he was able. He flew a total of 58 combat missions for which he received the Distinguished Flying Cross, 3 Air Medals, and the Presidential Unit Citation. Throughout the war, President Bush was encouraged and supported by letters from his sweetheart, Barbara Pierce. They had met at a Christmas dance in 1941 and quickly fell in love. They were engaged in 1943 and married on January 6, 1945. Together, they would endure both difficult and joyous times, grow a large and loving family, and set the record for the longest married presidential couple with 73 years of an exemplary commitment to marriage. After his marriage to Barbara, Mr. Bush enrolled at Yale University. He graduated in 2.5 years on an accelerated track and was elected to one of the most prestigious academic societies, Phi Beta Kappa. He also served as president of the Delta Kappa Epsilon fraternity and as captain of the Yale baseball team. He played in the first 2 College World Series and maintained a love for baseball throughout his life. Upon graduation, the Bush family moved to Odessa, Texas, where President Bush pursued a career in the oil industry. He had a successful business career, founding 2 companies that eventually prompted the family to move to Houston in 1959. In 1966, President Bush ran for and won election to the United States House of Representatives to represent the 7th Congressional District of Texas. During his time in Congress, he supported influential legislation, including the Civil Rights Bill of 1968 that outlawed housing discrimination. After 4 years in the House, in 1971, President Bush was appointed as United States Ambassador to the United Nations. The Senate unanimously conserved his appointment, and he served as ambassador for 2 years. His time at the United Nations undoubtedly influenced him as he became one of America's greatest diplomats. In 1973, President Bush became chairman of the Republican National Committee, where he was tasked with guiding the Republican Party through the Watergate scandal and the resignation of President Nixon. In the President Ford administration, President Bush took on the role as chief of the U.S. Liaison Office in the People's Republic of China. Although this was not a diplomatic rank, his work greatly benefited U.S.-China relations. The United States had just recently opened relations with Communist China, and President Bush worked to establish a strong foundation for that relationship. In 1976, the Bush family returned to the United States while he served as director of the Central Intelligence Agency. His expansive knowledge of foreign relations and experience in building morale and teamwork made him a strong leader for the CIA during one of their most tumultuous times. President Bush worked not only to restore the reputation of the agency in the public eye, but also to improve relations with Capitol Hill. His experience as a legislator gave him the background to reconcile the CIA with Congress, and in the 357 days that he served as director, he testified before them a record-setting 51 times. With the transition from the Ford administration to the Carter administration, President Bush returned to Texas and became executive committee chairman of First International Bank of Houston. He also entered academia, where he spent a year as a part-time professor at Rice University and 2 years as director of the Council on Foreign Relations. In 1980, President Bush was elected vice president, serving with Ronald Reagan from 1981 to 1989. During his tenure as vice president, he took a hard stance against communism and tyranny while working to end the Cold War without bloodshed. He worked to support President Reagan and was one of the most successful vice presidents in history. His diplomatic finesse, his trustworthiness, and his patriotism made him beloved by the American people and a natural choice to run for president. In 1988, then Vice President Bush was elected by our nation to become the 41st president. Inaugurated on January 20th, 1989, President Bush became the first serving vice president to be elected president since Martin Van Buren in 1836. Just 293 days into his presidency, President Bush witnessed a major success in his almost decade-long fight against communism, with the fall of the Berlin Wall, followed shortly thereafter by the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. Afterward, President Bush and his administration played a significant role in reuniting East and West Germany. Today, Germany is a powerful nation and one of our country's strongest allies, none of which would have been possible without the skill, diplomacy, commitment, and tactfulness of President Bush. In the continuation of his fight against oppression and tyranny, President Bush was one of Kuwait's strongest allies and advocates after its invasion by Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein. On January 17, 1991, the first Gulf War began in an effort to restore the sovereignty of Kuwait's government and the stability of the Persian Gulf. Lasting just 100 hours, the offensive strategy was a great success, causing the Iraqi military to retreat from Kuwait. One of the landmarks of President Bush's administration was the drafting of the North American Free Trade Agreement, more commonly known as NAFTA. This agreement encouraged better trade with our nation's northern and southern neighbors by eliminating tariffs and streamlining trade. Since NAFTA's implementation, the American economy has grown by 54% and has added 25 million jobs. President Bush has also created, with signing into law, the Americans with Disabilities Act. This civil rights legislation prohibits discrimination based on disability and requires reasonable accessibility accommodations. While only serving one term as president, President Bush's administration was a success, and its impact went far beyond his presidency. Upon retirement, he continued to have influence in international affairs and American politics. In 1990, the Points of Life Foundation was created by President Bush. Inspired by his 1,000 Points of Light speeches that encourage volunteerism and selflessness, the foundation is dedicated to engaging people to solve the world's challenges through service to others. To cement his legacy, the George Bush Presidential Library opened in 1997 in conjunction with the Bush School of Government and Public Service at Texas A&M University in College Station, Texas. Although he was a graduate of Yale University, President Bush chose Texas A&M to be the site of his library and the adjoining Bush School because of the school's patriotism, values, military history, and commitment to public service. Having lived a life of service to others, President Bush was committed to educating the next generation who would go on to serve and to lead the nation, not only with academic knowledge, but with Texas Aggie values of respect, excellence, leadership, loyalty, integrity, and selfless service. An Aggie at heart, President Bush and Barbara were both beloved by our Texas A&M and Brazos Valley communities. As Congressman for the 17th District of Texas, I'm humbled to represent their adopted home in College Station, and I am forever grateful for the wisdom and support President Bush personally shared with me when I started my path in public service in 2010. A man of military service, he built a special relationship with the Corps of Cadets at Texas A&M and was even made an honorary member of the Corps in 2012. In 2012, President Bush and I were both inducted into the Texas A&M Corps of Cadets Hall of Honor. Also, as an Aggie, I cannot overstate the privilege bestowed upon Texas A&M University for our campus to have served as President and Barbara Bush's final resting place, along with their daughter, Robin. Mr. Speaker, President Bush's life was defined by his service to his family, to our country, and to the world. He will be forever remembered as a husband, a father, a grandfather, a great-grandfather, a decorated veteran, a leader, a mentor, a selfless servant, and a friend to millions. My wife Gina and I offer our deepest and heartfelt condolences to the Bush family. We also lift up the family and friends of President Bush in our prayers. Earlier this week, I introduced and the House of Representatives unanimously passed H.Res. 1192, honoring the life of President Herbert Walker Bush. I was humbled to offer this resolution, and I've also requested that a United States flag be flown over the Capitol to honor his life and legacy. As I close today, I urge all Americans to continue praying for our country, for our veterans, for our military men and women who serve us, and for our first responders who keep us safe here at home.